It was almost 7 years ago to the day, 2 days off, that we were here. I ask for your forgiveness in advance, as I will need to gather myself a few times. I speak on behalf of the grandchildren whom Grandma loved so much. From her 90th birthday on, I had the good fortune to be with Grandma for each of her birthdays. Somewhere around her 93rd or 94th birthday, I was conveying to a friend of mine how important it was that I'm present for her birthdays. I held up my hands and I explained that I know that in all likelihood the number of years she has left I can count on my fingers. I pray to God it takes both hands, but it's here. And Baruch Hashem, that wish came true as she lived to 101 and a half. All good years. Last week a client of mine helped to put things in perspective when I told him what had befallen Grandma. He asked me how old she was. I said 101 and a half. He says, 101 and a half? Where do I sign up for the 101 and a half plus a stroke plan? I'll sign today. And so I ask you, for how many of you here today would you sign up for 101 and a half plus a stroke? Raise your hand. I think most of us would be on that plan. Exactly. As most of you now know, Grandma had two huge passions, cooking and fishing. Grandma was an absolutely outstanding cook. She made meals for hundreds of people at various fundraising dinners in Zeta Shul in Charleston, West Virginia. She authored several cookbooks, and the final one was reprinted and released earlier this year, entitled Still Cooking at 100. I had her autograph my copy earlier this year. Some of my earliest memories of Grandma involved her cooking. Her chocolate chip cookies were irresistible, as were her little chocolate cupcakes, her parva ice cream parfaits. Her fish chowder was an essential component of any successful walleye fishing trip. I remember her braiding her own Shabbos challah 1/3 and 4/2 as she knotted it up. I remember just how excited she would get when making gefilte fish, when she chilled it, how the fish juice would gel. It's called yoich. She would serve gefilte fish and offer up a dollop of yoich to go along with it. Whether it's yoich or yach is, far from subtle, I promise you. It's a matter of personal taste. Grandma routinely got up, in fact, in the wee hours of the morning, the middle of the night, to cook. It reminds me of an occurrence roughly 12 years ago in her house in Boca. It was December 24th, at Christmas Eve. Me and my three brothers all went to one of those matzo ball events, the Jewish singles party on New Year's Eve. Two of my brothers were fortunate enough to meet two young ladies, and they were actually sisters. Brought them back to the house. My brother and I came back ourselves. We went to bed, and the other were getting to know each other better in the common rooms in the house. My brother and his friend, one of them, they set up shop on the pull-out couch in the living room where they got better acquainted. The other one took the discarded couch cushions and sort of constructed a little fort, a little refuge underneath the dining room table, and that's where he and his friend got to know each other a little bit better. Somewhere in the middle of the night, the door to Grandma's bedroom opens up, and out she comes, walking down the hallway. The woman who is in the middle of the living room dove underneath the covers because she was cold. The woman underneath the dining room table freaked. Grandma went to the kitchen and starts cooking, and was there for some time, thus pinning down the two couples in their respective locations, until eventually she got done and walked back to her room, giggling apparently at what she allegedly didn't see. I wanted to take a moment to publicly thank my brother Jonas. and his wife Carly. For giving Zeta and Grandma the simcha of a grandchild's wedding, and for later bestowing Grandma with the wonderful credential of great-grandmother. My nephew Sammy had the opportunity to be with Grandma on several occasions, and Grandma knew of Elliot's birth back in November and saw his picture. As some of you may remember, Grandma stood up and spoke at Jonas's wedding. Her opening remarks were actually quite funny. I went back yesterday and I watched the tape so I could quote it verbatim. Carly, your dear mother-in-law has asked me to present you with one of my cookbooks. I hope this will help you. She then goes on and says, I had a very, very difficult time when I married my husband. She went on to explain that to do with her lack of cooking experience, but her delivery was quite funny. Grandma was always a happy person, as you heard. You could hear it in her voice every time she answered the phone. Hello! That's what she would say. Her mannerism for doing so has become somewhat incorporated into my habit, and as a result, oftentimes when I'm calling somebody, especially when it's a family member, I will commence the conversation with a lively hello. And that little half smile, that chuckle that the salutation always elicits on the other end of the phone, that little injection of happiness, is an ongoing blessing from Grandma. It is one of the many ways that she lives on through us. And among my brothers, there's a few words that are inextricably linked to Grandma. These are inside jokes for the most part, but bubbla, umbashrian, consomme with rice, cotillion, glazed corned beef. There are just a few. Grandma was always optimistic. She had a way of seeing the fun part of a bad situation. On September the 2nd of 2004, I flew down to Florida because Category 4 Hurricane Frances was heading towards Florida and the track was slated to be dangerously close to Boca Raton. The goal was for me to go down there, board up the house, and bring Zeta and Grandma to safety. But it became clear very early on that driving them to safety was an impossibility due to the jammed up roads. Every highway heading north was jammed, and the gas stations had exhausted their supply of fuel. So there was no choice but to fly them out. I chartered a twin Cessna, had it flown in from Tampa to the Boca Raton airport. I stocked it with some goodies, and we departed about 10 p.m. just before the FAA shut down all the airports on the eastern seaboard. And as we're flying along northwest, transversing central Florida to escape the incoming storm, Grandma and Zeta are in the cabin, I'm up in the cockpit. Grandma's apparently having the time of her life in this private airplane. She taps me on the shoulder and I lean back, and she whispers in my ear, "Don't tell the pilot how much fun we're having, or else he may charge us more." And as we're waiting out the storm from the safety of a hotel in Tampa, Florida, Grandma kept going on and on about what a wonderful vacation this is, and what a nice time she was having. Initially, I tried to explain to her that, "Grandma, this isn't a vacation, this is an evacuation." But in Grandma's eyes, the difference between them was simply two letters, and she morphed one into the other for the better. We are just so fortunate that we had Grandma at so many of our simchas, 4 bar mitzvahs, all of our graduations from universities, medical schools, business school. She was able to reap the tremendous nachas of seeing my father deliver his presidential address at the American Association of Thoracic Surgery, which represents one of the most elite and prestigious honors that can be bestowed upon a thoracic surgeon. We were blessed to be able to throw her 3 blowout birthday bashes for her 99th, 100th, and 101st birthdays, with thanks to my parents and in particular to Mom for arranging those parties. In hearing Grandma speak about her family and her previous generations, it sounded to me like she came from a wonderful and colorful lineage. In the years prior to Zeta's passing, a spirited debate would periodically break out between Zeta and Grandma whenever Grandma would bring up the fact that her family was descendants of both the great Vilna Gaon, and the Shlah HaKodesh, who was another Talmudic scholar. And Grandma said her parents, her grandparents, and in-laws used to debate about whose yichus was greater, the Vilna Gaon's or the Shlah HaKodesh. And Zayda always went bananas when Grandma invoked the whole Vilna Gaon discussion, and was always quick to try and discredit the whole business as sheer nonsense. It was actually quite entertaining to watch. But personally, I don't care much about the veracity of the lineage claims, because I know with certainty that we have wonderful yichus. We have Lillian Cooper as our grandmother. Grandma told us on several occasions, that when she passes, there are not to be any tears. No tears, she would say. And then she went on to say that she wanted us to commemorate the anniversary of her passing, not by being sad, but by getting together and going fishing. Her request was that we honor her memory by doing the activity which she loved so much and brought her so much pleasure. Grandma, you have my word, that will happen. Henceforth, December 31st will always be a fishing day. As my father did, I would like to thank all of you for being present today, to be here today. Honors my grandma and our family. And finally, one of the most personal connections that I had with Grandma was on Rosh Hashanah for these past several years. After my Zayda passed in 2006, Grandma spent the high holidays with us in Philadelphia. I have the kavod, the honor of being the fellow who blows the shofar at my parents' synagogue, Har Zion's. Rosh Hashanah became infinitely more special for me when I was able to blow the shofar with Grandma in attendance. This was holy. Each year, when it got to the point in the service near where Tchiyat Shofar was going to happen, I would stand next to Grandma and hold her hand for a few moments. She would stroke my hand, and it gave me the strength and merit before walking up to the bima to do my job. And once I was done, it was always such a joy to see how proud she was, to see the happiness on her face. I would say to her, "Did you hear me, Grandma?" "Oh, yes," is what she would reply. Throughout the ages, the shofar has traditionally been sounded on the high holidays to announce Rosh Hashanah, to announce the Sabbath, as well as to mark important, holy, and momentous occasions, of which this is one. And so, as we wish Grandma a wonderful Gan Eden, I would like to conclude my remarks by asking everyone to stand as I sound the shofar, announcing to the heavens that Lillian Cooper, Leah Bas Moshe Abraham Bass, the last of her family of 9, has finally come home. Thank you, in regards to everyone.
Please remain standing for the Kegmah Lechamim.